Today, Himeji Castle stands as Japan's most pristine samurai fortress, surviving for over 4 centuries.
Affectionately named the White Heron, this architectural marvel draws millions of global visitors annually.
The monumental complex spans 83 distinct buildings, completely built out of wood and stone plaster.
Its towering main keep rises nearly 15 stories high when measured from the base of its stone hill. Despite devastating wars, earthquakes, and fires, this vulnerable wooden giant has never been destroyed. Engineers today marvel at the complex joinery that allows the massive framework to flex and resist shocks. Every wall, gate, and pathway was calculated to confuse invaders and trap them in lethal crossfires. But how did feudal builders erect this massive samurai stronghold without a single piece of modern machinery? To understand its birth, we must rewind to the year 1600, when the land sat empty and scarred by war. Following the historic Battle of Sekigahara, Lord Ikeda Terumasa was granted this strategic province. Terumasa envisioned a massive stronghold that would display the absolute dominance of the new shogun.
Historians believe over 20,000 workers were conscripted from surrounding villages to build it.
The initial layout required precise engineering to utilize the natural contours of the steep hill. Clearing the dense forest was the critical first step to opening up the rugged topography for construction. By the spring of 1601, the hill was fully prepared for its immense stone foundation.
Sourcing enough stone proved difficult, forcing builders to scavenge quarries across the entire region.
Every block was individually shaped, utilizing a classic dry stone method known as nozurazumi.
Teams of over 100 men coordinated their pulls to drag the colossal rocks up the steep slopes. Deep foundation trenches were dug straight into the bedrock to ensure maximum stability for the fort. The largest rocks were carefully positioned at the corners to act as the primary structural anchors. No mortar was used. Instead, thousands of smaller packing stones filled the internal cavities tightly. This flexible, interlocking design allowed the immense walls to shift safely during seismic tremors. The unique fan-shaped curve, called Ogi no Koba, was specifically engineered to prevent scaling by ninjas. Simultaneously, master carpenters prepared the colossal timber pillars that would support the inner keep. By 1602, the colossal stone platform stood ready for the great timber skeleton. Historians believe massive drainage networks were chiseled deep into the hill to prevent mudslides. Every joint was cut by hand with millimeter precision, allowing the wood to interlock seamlessly. Thousands of structural pillars were seasoned and treated to endure the harsh, damp seasons. The core architecture relied on 2 titanic pillars extending from the base straight to the top floors. By 1603, the base framework was secured, marking the end of the foundation phase. Before the walls were raised, the timber skeleton was bound with massive ropes for initial stability. Metal nails were entirely avoided, relying instead on heavy wooden dowels to secure the timbers. The internal spacing allowed for massive garrisons to move quickly between levels during a siege. As the structure climbed higher, an intricate web of flexible bamboo scaffolding enveloped the keep. Lightweight and incredibly strong, bamboo was the perfect material for high-altitude building. The inner walls began as simple woven lattices before being coated in protective layers. A specialized plaster recipe was created to provide both extreme durability and fire resistance. Multiple layers of mud and straw formed the thick core insulation before the white finish. By the end of 1604, the base structure resembled a massive earthen bunker. The transition to the upper keeps required intricate structural alignment to balance the final weight. As the structure entered its 5th year, the main keep began its rapid ascent into the sky. The application of white slaked lime plaster finally gave the fortress its iconic heron appearance. Every defensive opening was framed with thick plaster to safeguard the wood from flaming arrows. The complex roof system required thousands of precisely angled interlocking bracket sets. By 1605, the secondary keeps were linked to create a unified defense network. Specialized clay tiles were molded and fired locally to withstand immense weathering. Roof ridge tiles were emblazoned with the Lord's crest to mark ownership and divine protection. The heavily fortified gates were built thick enough to withstand direct battering ram assaults. By 1606, the towering silhouette dominated the entire Harima province. Interior flooring relied on massive planks engineered to muffle the footsteps of potential assassins. By 1607, the sprawling complex functioned as a fully integrated defensive matrix. Specialized roof mortar mixed with seaweed extract sealed the clay tiles against torrential storm winds. Over thousands of gun ports, known as teppozama, were strategically cut to dominate every approach. Internal staircases were purposefully built narrow and steep to slow down heavily armored invaders. The outer defensive perimeters were expanded to encompass vast residential zones for loyal samurai. A ton of iron hardware was forged to secure the heavy wooden gates against brute physical trauma. The outer water moats were engineered deep enough to halt heavy subterranean tunneling attempts. Elegant curved gables were integrated to symbolize the supreme cultural authority of the Ikeda clan. By 1608, the massive structure had finally reached its full towering height. Mythological fish ornaments were carved to serve as powerful talismans against destructive fire. Angled floor openings were built to allow defenders to rain heavy rocks down on wall climbers. The structural apex required perfect architectural balance to counteract extreme lateral wind forces. As construction neared its final phase, the fortress began shedding its wooden chrysalis. Aesthetic mastery balanced military function, introducing serene private gardens for the inner court. By the winter of 1609, the great samurai fortress stood functionally complete. Yet, a hidden crisis almost halted the build when a severe shortage of stone plagued the province. Legend states a poor widow donated her precious stone mortar, inspiring thousands to follow suit. Look closely, and you will find ancient stone coffins and gravestones embedded directly into the walls. Known as the Widow's Stone, this desperate architectural compromise remains a famous feature today. What began as a critical resource shortage created one of Japan's most structurally diverse foundations. With the main crisis resolved, builders focused on the iconic features defining the White Heron. The giant rooftop shachihoko became the ultimate crowning signature of the entire fortress complex. The path to the keep was designed as a psychological trap, intentionally confusing attackers. From a distance, the elegant white layers perfectly mimicked the wings of a soaring white heron. By late 1609, the absolute masterpiece of samurai architecture stood finished. The completed spiral layout formed an impenetrable maze, forcing any attacker into dead ends.
The Hishi Gate stood as the massive primary checkpoint, heavily guarded by elite samurai units.
Defenders calculated every angle of the parapets to unleash lethal volleys of arrows and stones. The sheer slope of the high stone ramparts made scaling the inner keep practically impossible.
The stark white plaster coating served an absolute dual purpose: visual majesty and fire defense. Small, heavily shuttered window openings provided optimal surveillance over the lower fields.
Massive interior weapon armories stood fully stocked, prepared for a prolonged siege campaign. The intricate layering of ornamental gables masterfully hid the true number of internal floors.
By late 1609, the absolute pinnacle of feudal defense stood completed.
An elaborate warning bell system kept the vast castle garrisons in a state of constant readiness.
The famous stone drop chutes, or ishi otoshi, perfectly commanded the critical blind spots.
The majestic structure perfectly blended dominant military architecture with supreme artistic grace. Thousands of elite soldiers occupied the massive complex, establishing absolute regional dominance. The flexible, interlocking wooden frame stood fully prepared to survive violent seismic activity.
Varying shapes of loopholes, or sama, designated specific defensive weapon assignments.
The grand design perfectly mirrored the supreme military might of the unified shogun nation. Every courtyard functioned as a self-contained trap, isolating invaders in deadly crossfires. The golden insignias served as a constant visual reminder of absolute feudal loyalty.
The completed fortress instantly became the bustling economic and political hub of the entire region.
The majestic white heron stood finished, a brilliant monument to absolute samurai perfection.
Returning to the present day, Himeji Castle remains a stunning survivor of Japan's feudal past.
The fortress stands completely unaltered, defying centuries of intense warfare and modernization.
Designated as a premier World Heritage Site, it continues to anchor Japan's cultural legacy.
Modern structural engineers still study its ancient engineering to build resilient earthquake tech. By relying on ingenious interlocking timber and communal sacrifice, they built a monument for eternity.